Okay. The the title of our discussion this evening is How to Be an Anti-Racist. Our discussion theme is coming from Dr. Fenty's book, Dr. Ibram Fenty, who wrote the book by the same title, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Each one of us from the various traditions from the presenters will be speaking from their own theological traditions, and our whole reason for being here is to actually try to find solutions to racism in our time, and hopefully we can at least kick the can down the road a little bit. So as we said earlier, the first presenter will be Karen. Karen, go right ahead.
Hi, it's so good to be with you all. My name is Karen Lee Scrivo. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal faith. We're guided by our 7 principles rather than a common creed. Our principles focus on how we are with each other and in the world. They cover things like respecting every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and democratic principle, and respecting the interdependent web of life, which we're all a part. Those are all good, and yet they don't specifically address racism. As a liberal, predominantly white faith tradition, we have a history of fighting racism and also of falling short. During the last several years, we've been examining our own history of racism along with our proud moments of joining abolitionists, marching during the civil rights movement, and working to ensure that Black Lives Matter. Our denomination has recently been discussing adding an 8th principle that calls for, quote, working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. This has led to some difficult discussions within our congregations, some saying our current principles already cover this, and others citing the need to explicitly commit to being anti-racist. During these debates, I've noticed that we often have differing definitions of being anti-racist or what a racist is. I really appreciate Dr. Kendi's definition of a racist as believing certain racial groups are better than others and supporting policies that lead to inequity and injustice. Some of the debate in my denomination has been about our denial or discomfort over our part in racism. We like to think of ourselves as good people. Definitions of racism that focus on the actions of a few bad and immoral people make it harder to accept that we are socialized in a culture of white supremacy and that we have supported and do support policies that can lead to inequality and injustice. Seeing racism as individual acts also paints racism as a problem of hatred and ignorance. This puts the focus on changing racist minds through education and moral appeals. As Dr. Kendi says, quote, the source of racist ideas was not ignorance or hate, but self-interest. He goes on to say, treating ignorance and hate and expecting racism to shrink suddenly seems like treating a cancer patient's symptoms and expecting the tumor to shrink. But as Dr. Kendi notes, the problem of racism has been at the core a problem of power, not a problem of morality or ignorance. So trying to change racist minds before changing racist policies hasn't really worked. Dr. Kendi notes that people's attitudes changed after policies had changed. He points to the white support of desegregated schools and neighborhoods came after policies changed in the 1950s and 1960s. Support for Obamacare came after its passage. Fighting for mental and moral changes after changing policies, Dr. Kendi says, quote, means fighting alongside growing benefits and dissipation of fears, making it possible for anti-racist power to succeed. For me, this has also opened up space to admit the anti-racist ideas within my own life. I'm sorry, the racist ideas within my own life, to confront the racist policies and ideas that I support, and to find places that I can work with others against anti-racist policies. Thank you.
Khalil, you're muted. Khalil, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Welcome to Sister Aziza. Assalamu alaikum. She is here and she doesn't have her mic on. Aziza, can she hear? No, she's also muted, right?
I'm here and I apologize for not figuring it out quick enough.
It's okay. We are all trying to learn this.
Well, I used 3 computers to get to the edge.
You're coming up. You are going to be coming up shortly. Right now, we're going to hear from Dr. Dorothy McGuffey. She'll make an opening statement, and she'll be speaking from the Christian tradition. Is Dorothy still with us? Dorothy, can you hear us? Okay. She's also muted, right?
Yeah, she has to unmute herself. I can't unmute her.
Okay.
All right.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Reverend Dr. Doris T. McGuffey. I am an interfaith minister, and I follow the faith tradition of the Unity movement. From that perspective, our faith and what we believe is that there is one God called by many names and many expressions in the universe. And we experience that expression in a phenomenal ways as well. There are also many paths that lead to what is our expression of the faith. And as well, we move to the consciousness of we are all one. We also serve from the condition, from the from the expression of consciousness within, where we are in terms of how we live in the universe depends on our consciousness, our level of consciousness. And that is generally expressed at 3 different levels. Our super consciousness, meaning that we are aligned with our God self. And our active consciousness, which is what moves us through our daily lives. And then our subconscious, which is kind of like the thing under the ship that moves it.
Okay.
You see the ship, but you can't see that which is beneath the water that moves the ship.
Okay.
So that's kind of how our subconscious work. So those are kind of the aspects of the faith that guides our daily experience. We are supporters of prayer and meditation as 2 primary tools that support us in moving through the challenges that we may have or experiencing the opportunities that we have to grow closer to that oneness, which is closer to an expression of love closer to an expression of our God self in every aspect of our daily lives. So we ask for our thoughts, our words, and our actions to be given and to us to guide us every day. So from that perspective, when I think about and have read and listened to the different videos and read the book, it's amazing how from the beginning of time, and I'm talking about like 400 years ago when slavery began, up until today, we still have so many challenges that we are confronted with. You know, one thing, when we think of, as Dr. Martin Luther King says, that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in the universe. And from our spiritual self, regardless of our tradition, we call a divine energy that we call love. And in my experience, from the umbrella of the different faiths, there is an expression of love, there is an expression of caring for our brother, there is an expression of love God, love our fellow man and our family. So in that context, it's kind of hard to see how we as human beings in 400 years hasn't mastered that lesson. And when I think of the lessons that the author here is talking about, it seems like even today, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. So much of when I look to a scripture that could support what I wanted to say today, I went to Micah, the book of Micah. It says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Now that seems pretty simple. Seems like a pretty simple thing to do. But in reality, for us human beings, it seems like a difficult thing for us to do. Although we are I believe the scientific word is Homo sapiens, that's supposed to put us at the point of the pyramid when it comes to our ability to learn, to investigate, to analyze, to make decisions based on what our desires are and how we matriculate in God's universe. We kind of fall back to the level of the other animals in the kingdom to move into our reptilian expression. So when I think about all of the things that we talk about here, is if we move to a point of living with a consciousness of a lack of equity in terms of how we live in the world. That equity, that inequity, that concept or belief in equity falls outside of what we in each of our faith truly believes. So he talks about and explores many different aspects of why that is true. One that really spoke to me was the distinction of distinction of being racist and racism, and how each of those flows into different aspects of our being. Racism has more to do with the policies, the structural system in which we operate. So when I think of that, I begin to think about the structural system for me in terms of laws, policies, guidelines, beginning with the Emancipation Act, going on down to the 13th Amendment, coming on down to the Civil Rights of 1964, and even in terms of our own work environments, structures are in place. Structures are in place in many instances, yet we as human beings and that which we learn on Sunday morning kind of falls flat in terms of our daily lives and our activities. That sense of inequity moves into our being, as opposed to our practicing what we preach, what we dance about, and what we sing about. One of the things that is talked about in our book is the racist, in terms of how that energy is expressed. That's more of the individual when it comes to our thoughts, our words, and our actions as an expression. And for me, the difference in where we are in terms of our universal expression, we may have laws, but we can have the laws, but it's the consciousness of the individual that activates that really make it work. That really make it work. How am I doing on time here?
Yeah, 1 minute.
Okay, all right. The other two things I want is the aspect of power that he talks about. And that was important for me to understand, because that we have power, but it's our interpretation and our understanding and our application of that power in our environment that really moves us forward. Mm-hmm. Secondly, what I want to say is about the author himself, and that is he's a recovering cancer patient, and what happened during the time that he was writing this book. His thought was, when they were asking him, okay, do you stop writing this book? And his question was, well, I was going to put some things in this book, but before I got the cancer, I was thinking, well, they may not like me, so I'm going to not put this in the book. But then after he said, well, I may be dead when the book is published, so it'd be all right to do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that how so often we choose not to act in a way that expresses our own being to the fullness, because we fear what someone else will do, what someone else will say.
Yes, this makes good sense. Dr. McGuffey, thank you for your insight. I appreciate it very much, as always. And I will turn the mic to Dr. Christopher Bell, who will be speaking from a humanist position. Dr. Bell? Is Dr. Bell still with us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you, yes.
But I can't see you. That's all. I'll work with the voice. My name is Chris Bell, folks, and I am a humanist. Now you ask the question, what is a humanist? Humanist is a person who holds a faith that human beings are able to be creative, good, ethical, caring, and just to one another in the building of their societies without referring to a supernatural God for help or guidance. Now, they are called other things. Some people call such people agnostic, atheists, free thinkers, and that type of thing. Well, that's what I am. Let me tell you why I and a number of other people are this way. We think that humanism, that dealing with the humankind, the views and the values of human life, is the epitome of living this life on earth. Now, we affirm that humanist is a realistic alternative to theologies of despair and ideologies of violence. And it is also a source of rich personal significance and a genuine satisfaction in serving other people. Now, I want to tell Khalil that I appreciate his openness to allow me to bring humanism into a conversation that includes the Abrahamic religions. Humanness and humanism is generally looked at as not religious by some people, looked at as being not in tune with the general population. I agree. I agree, because we think we can be good without dealing with dogmas that people say come from God. We can be good and kind and caring and compassionate without dealing with imposed laws that somebody tell us this is the mind of God. Now there are
we can't see the top of your head. We can't see the top of your head. Yeah, right there. Yeah, that's better. That's better.
I can't see myself.
Okay. We can
That's my
see.
problem.
We can
If you can see me, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what we suggest is, and what do I mean by humanist? You have a number of humanist organizations. One of them is an African American humanist organization, of which I am one of the members. And we had a meeting here, or universal meeting of us, about 5 years ago. Now, the idea is that for most of us, we reject the notion of a Christ who is a God. That's just beyond the pale for most of us. Most of us accept the sense of a God, but not necessarily the laws, the dogmas that religion says is the mind of God. But we do agree that if there is a will that God has on earth, it must be done through humankind. It must be done through humankind. So we say humans actually undergird the whole civilization as to what they feel, think, and treat each other. Humanism, then we should concentrate on human values. Good and not good should be judged based on how it affects human beings, and not because of some ancient motto or ancient ritual or dogma that was done years ago. So what we have as one of our guideposts is we declare that reason and science should lead to our understanding of the universe and of nature.
Dr.
And
Bill,
we
you have
believe, can you hear me?
You have 30 minutes, Dr. Bill.
30 minutes?
Yes, 30 minutes.
30 minutes? 30 minutes?
30 seconds. I'm sorry. 30 seconds. I'm sorry.
All right. All right. I saw you.
Just make a closing statement.
So,
Yeah.
and one of the things we believe in that generally the Abrahamic religions will not agree to is we attempt to transcend parochial loyalties based on religion, based on race, based on gender. All right? The rules that you find in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, the goodness that is to be done, they're talking about the in group. They're not talking about the out group. All right? So we as humans say, hey, let's deal with out groups as well in bringing people together. So in fact, what you are doing now, Khalil, is not based in Islam talk teaching. It is something you're doing over and above that. You are in the range of humanism and bringing us together to talk about these things. I'll stop here. I haven't even gotten to the book, but that's all right.
I love it.
That's all right. Let me see if
There's
I
a lot
get
to cover. A lot to cover. Our next presenter is Dr. Aziza El-Hibri. She just happens to be someone that I've been following for a lot of years. As
Say it.
I've been following all of you. Dr. Aziza.
Yeah, hi. Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be with you, all of you. And I will start from where Dr. Bell stopped. So this would be like the reverse of the order of the lecture I was preparing. But in Islam, there is no in-group. And part of the problem about racism, which is somehow connected to our religion, is that the real information about our religion does not come through. So we have to talk about it. The reason we don't have an in-group is because very clearly God says in the Quran that Muslims, good Jews, good Christians, good people, God will judge them to go to heaven. Where is the in-group? The in-group is humanity. And that's the way the Quran talks about us. The most important thing in the Quran, which will get us to the discussion of racism, is that you need to believe in the unity of God. There is only one God, and He is supreme. Everybody else, human under Him, is equal. Anyone who tries to think that they are better than the other are violating a very important principle in Islam, the principle of adala, or justice. So I'm going to tell you two stories that you can think of as parables, but they are also defined elsewhere in the Quran explicitly.
It's 7 o'clock.
Excuse me?
No, go right ahead.
The first story I will tell you, and I remember telling one of these stories on the Hill, and it involves Satan. And the next day, the papers wrote that Dr. El-Hibri believes in Satan. Yeah, I believe there is a Satan because I believe there is a God. And the story goes like this: at the creation of Adam, who was created from clay, God summoned the angels and Satan, Iblis, who was then not cursed, and ordered them to bow to Adam, in whom He has put a spark of divine spirit. And the angels bowed to Adam, but Iblis refused to do so, in violation to the supreme command of the supreme will in the universe. What could possibly make Iblis take such a huge risk so as to disobey God? And the Quran asks, it says that God asked Iblis, so that we know the answer, what prevented you from obeying me? And Iblis said, basically, it's obvious. I'm better than he is. He's made from clay, I'm made of fire. That story talks about hierarchical thinking, oppressive thinking, that goes not only to race, but to gender, to beliefs, to all sorts of areas. Anytime you catch yourself saying, I'm better than he is, you're using satanic logic. That's what the Quran tells us. And the Quran says, we created you of male and female and made you into nations and tribes so that you get to know each other. That is, so that you celebrate each other's differences, variety, not so that you could say, I am better than you in the satanic mode. But that's only half the story. Why is saying I'm better than you so serious? There comes the second story about Adam and Eve in the garden. That's when Satan told Adam, if you eat from that forbidden tree, it's not an apple tree, forbidden tree, you will have an eternal life and a kingdom that does not end. In other words, if we violate God's order to us, that we are all equal, only God is supreme, if we violate that, Satan is telling us, but there are rewards. You will get rewards for that. What are the rewards? To say I'm better than you is not just a statement, it has consequences. And one big consequence, if I can make it as big as you could see it, is what colonialism did to countries where the white man said, I'm better than you are. And therefore, you don't need your resources as much as I need them. And in this country, you don't need as much wealth as much as I need it. And you can go on and on and on because I am better than you are. That's the beginning of the sin. That's the primary sin, because you are rejecting the supremacy of God and his order. So I think there's a third piece I will throw in and then I'll be quiet. When Satan was cursed, he asked God to give him reprieve until the day of judgment. He said, I will show you. This Adam, you liked him better than me. You preferred him to me. I'll show you what I can do with him. And God gave Satan the reprieve. And when I talk about this, I tell my Muslim students, what the story says is that the test of Adam did not end with Adam coming out of Eden. That everybody on earth, every one of us, will have their own test. The test as to whether you think you are better than others, and the test whether you're greedy, and because you think you're better than others, you're gonna take away all their privileges and appropriate them to you. And so, Dr. McGuffey, I am not as hopeful as you are that very quickly we can end up in a situation where we raise everybody's consciousness and there is no evil. I think it's a constant human struggle between what God told us and what Satan is trying to tell us. But I do think that in the end, humanity will win against the evil temptation. How do I know that? Because when God was creating Adam, the angels objected. They said, how could you create somebody who is going to spill blood on this earth? And God said, I know what you do not know. And I think what God knows is that in the end, we will be able to save humanity and ourselves.
Good, Dr. Aziza. Thank you for your opening
Thank
statement. And following you is Reverend Norman Allen from the Unitarian Universalist community.
Thank you, Khalil. Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here. As Khalil said, I am Reverend Norman Allen. I have the great honor of serving Davies Unitarian Universalist congregation in Camp Springs. I know we're well represented this evening in the audience, so hello to everybody. For me, the way Dr. Kendi approaches this work of anti-racism feels very closely aligned with our work as faith leaders and in line with the work of all of our congregations. Anti-racism, as Dr. Kendi says, is active. It's something we do, something we can fail at, something we can learn to do better. In the same way, I think all of us are moving towards something. We don't sit in our faith. Our faith is not static. We are challenged by it, whatever that faith is. And that challenge calls us forward. It calls us to become our better selves. So I really love that active nature of what Dr. Kendi is preaching. I also love that he insists we remove the phrase, I'm not a racist, from our language. He just said, stop saying, I'm not a racist, because it's not about who you are or who you're not. It's about what you do. And that, I think, also is in alignment with all of our faith traditions. Our faith is reflected in our actions. It's like that wonderful quote, it's attributed to St. Francis, who supposedly said, "Go out and preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words." I mean, you shouldn't be talking, you should be showing people who you are and what your faith is. So with that in mind, I want to lift up some of the active, faithful, anti-racist work that we are specifically pursuing as Unitarian Universalists these days. And it by chance follows very nicely on what Reverend Karen Scrivo shared earlier. So just one very small, but I think very powerful example. And I know this is happening in other places as well, not just in Unitarian Universalist settings. But for a few years now, if you attend a gathering at our headquarters in Boston or at many of our congregations or at some of our seminaries, the facilitator of that discussion will open by saying something like, "We'll now enter into an open conversation. I invite those whose identities are traditionally privileged to sit back a moment until those whose identities are traditionally marginalized have had a chance to speak." It literally brings people from the margins into the center. It reverses basic practices of the last 100 years. It's active anti-racism. Another example of faith and anti-racism coming together is even closer to home. This past June, the Davies congregation took a huge step forward in their history. As Karen mentioned, our Unitarian Universalist faith is officially built upon 7 principles, starting with the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But about 25 congregations across the country, including Davies as of June, have now adopted the 8th principle that Karen spoke about. And that 8th principle calls us to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So that 8th principle is a clear call, a clarion call to faithful anti-racist action. It's a call to accountably dismantle racism. So to enlarge upon that example, or to make it more specific, about 2 weeks from now, all of the committee chairs at Davies are going to come together and meet with the 8th principle task force. And they're going to be introduced to something called a social justice rubric. It's a tool that helps people honestly assess where they are, where their policies and practices might be upholding a culture of white supremacy rather than dismantling it. Then those chairs will go back to their individual committees and they'll start working through that. They'll start looking at really where they are, what their practices and policies are, how they bring people into those committees, how the work is adjusted, and they will start to change and adapt in order to come into alignment with the 8th principle, in order to do the work of dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So I don't want to pretend that that's not going to be anything but extremely difficult work. It's going to be hard work, but I think it's work that we are ready for at Davies. I think it's work that, as Karen was saying, the Unitarian Universalist movement as a whole is ready for this work and is diving into it already. And I think, certainly for myself, I think for the Davies congregation, reading Dr. Kendi's book and coming together and discussing it, letting his work challenge us and move us forward as people of faith, that will be critical to the work we do. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, everybody.
Super. Thank you very much, Norman. That is. I'm glad to know that your congregation is actively engaged in trying to solve the problem. Tell me, what does your theologies, I'm speaking to everyone now, actually, how do you define a racist? What is a racist? Or do your theologies at all inform you what a racist is? I guess we'll just go the way we came. Norman, go right ahead. Would you like to answer the question, or?
Yeah, I don't know that our theology describes or defines a racist, and I'll be happy for Karen to dive in here as well with her thoughts. I think I would, I mean, personally, I'm going to fall back on what Dr. Kendi, you know, for lack of a better word, preaches, that it's about action. So I think my understanding from his writing in particular, but also from his recent discussion with the PG County libraries, is that you could do something racist at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you could do something anti-racist at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the idea of defining a person as identifying or taking the identity of racist or not racist is a misleading one. Yes. The only thing I would say more specifically to our theology is, as I mentioned, our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I think this goes to what Dr. Aziza was talking about as well. So there are no differences between us. And as soon as we start acting like there are, everyone suffers from that.
Right.
Karen, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just would add, I think that, you know, what we were talking about earlier in terms of that idea of putting ourselves above somebody else, you know, as I think that would really be my my definition as we've been looking at anti-racism, we've been looking at white supremacy, and that really is that cultural putting white race above, you know, others. But I agree with Norman in that we don't have anything specifically theologically grounded, but certainly our principles and that idea that none of us are better than any other of us.
Yes, yes.
Well, Leo, there are a few questions in the chat in the Q&A. Do you want to ask one of them now, or you want to hold on?
Actually, if you just wait for a few seconds, I want to kind of get an idea about the position of race and racism in the various theologies, and we got plenty of time. All right. Dr. Aziza, do you wish to make a comment?
I think I gave a general definition of the problem. And the problem is, it could be racism, it could be patriarchy, it could be a lot of other things, but we're focusing on racism now. But the general thing, a general description of all these categories is that we pick something arbitrary about a group of people. And then somehow we say, this is a sign that we can treat them as if we're better than them. Or, oh, they're better than us, because, you know, sometimes we buy into what they are claiming. And what I want to tell you is that this sign that we pick out changes from culture to culture. And in certain cultures where the sign is not there, you don't even see that difference. I mean, I can give you an example. I come from a family where we're all Arabs, but they all have different colors. Very dark skin, black eyes to blue eyes and blonde. This is how Arabs are. We're a mixture of a lot of people. When I meet my cousin, I don't think of him as black. I think of him as my cousin. So for us, we don't focus on that as a sign. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because one time when I was new in the US, I was stopped by a policeman because he thought I was going too fast and he gave me a ticket. And when I went to court, the judge asked me to describe that policeman. And I said, well, I don't remember him very well, but he's medium height, medium built. That's it. He said, that's like a lot of other policemen. What color was he? I said, I don't know. And he was so shocked that I could be looking at the policeman and yet saying, I don't know, but I truly didn't know. That was not the one thing I wanted to remember in my head. I see color, but it wasn't the one thing, a marker to define that policeman by, because I don't use it in my family and in my life. I'm not saying there are no racist Arabs. I know better than to make that claim, but I'm saying there are ways in which these signs that some cultures take to be very significant are not in others. And that means they are subjective. They have no objective reality. We give them objective reality. In my religion, it says God didn't give them this objective reality. So whatever you're talking about, you're manufacturing it yourself. And I like very much what Reverend Allen said about, let's talk about racist acts, because nobody is a racist, right? Everybody is really liberated. See what they do. And that also what the Quran says. Who is going to go to paradise? Those who believe and do good deeds. You have to do both. And good deeds mean that you treat the other person as a human being and treat them equally. So I think it's very clear in our, at least in my religion, I'm sure it's clear in other religions, but the problem is, what does it mean? Sometimes I ask myself, where are all the Christians and Jews and Muslims? Where are they?
Yes, yes. You know, I found it interesting in reading Fenty's work because he starts off with an idea that we're all racist, and we all have the opportunity to be anti-racist. And I found that very interesting. And he based the content of character on merit and the quality of your thinking and quality of your actions, which I found liberating, because I just had an interview with a woman who was a newly converted Muslim, and she was European American, and she was from the Appalachian Mountains. And she had a very, very southern drawl, and then in my mind was stupid, slow and stupid, and I had to wait a few minutes to work myself out of that preconceived idea, and listen to the quality of her thinking, you know, and also in doing so, I found out the lady was quite accomplished. She had written dozens of books on various different subjects, and she was a person that one could respect and appreciate, and definitely not considered a stupid person. But the whole idea was that I went into the conversation thinking that this was going to be something else that it turned out not to be, and so it was a moment of learning something there. Dr. Bell, the humanist in the room, what are your feelings about Fenty's definition about racist and anti-racist? Because I know you had a little problem with.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
I had a problem with, well, in one session, one man asked him what was his definition of racism. And he defined racism by using the words actions. He said, racist actions that result, or thoughts that result in racist actions or problems. He defined racism by using the word racist. Well, that's a small thing. I know what he meant, and they knew what he meant, and didn't have to be right in the English there in this public place. But you see, this subject is not new. The UU taught this 5 years ago. There's a book, and it has anti-racist on it that I attended. Actually, Jubilee Anti-Racism Training Participant Manual. Well, I was delighted to see the success of the book, because it means somebody is learning something about themselves. In my thinking of racism and my definition of it, I have posited a place for those who are not racist. To be racist or not racist, or to be anti-racist requires several things. One, awareness and action. All right.
Yes.
If you're not aware,
Yes.
then you're neither one or the other. You're neutral right there. If you're not aware of what does. Now, if what you do ends up hurting someone, and you are then told about it and not move on it to correct it, then you're racist.
Mm-hmm.
But my definition of racism means that you got those who are racist and short. Then you have this whole blanket of those who are anti-racist are getting in, as they said, good trouble. And you got a neutral area who are not aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So their living is not that they are endorsing anything, they are just living. Now that's how I look at it for my training.
Yes, and there's a positive point of view, Dr. Bell. Thank you for sharing it. Dr. McGuffey, you're sitting quietly in the corner there. Do you think that Dr. Kendi would agree with the assessment that Dr. Bell offers us concerning that non-racists have no intent to being racist? Tell us. Do you remember his comments in the book concerning this subject?
Well, what's coming to me is Dr. Kendi's discussion about how we come, essentially, in my words, into the universe like a clean sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, we are placed within a culture where we learn certain ways of being. And that essentially defines our behavior. And he also talks about a point of questioning, what do you have to lose? He was asking the question about what do you have to lose in terms of where we become, where we are defined as racist or not, in terms of the equity that is expressed there. So personally, I think for me it's more of an intention. Is it an intention? Is it one's intention to see an individual as less than, or to make a decision that moves you into a place of being less than? You know, is it my intention to continue to believe that I am more privileged than you, and my privilege elevates me to a place in society beyond you?
Yes.
Or does my history, my background, my culture, my family has taught me that because your skin is black, you are dumb, you're an idiot, you can't move to this place or that?
This is interesting. Non-racist, Karen, non-racist. Dr. Kendi didn't seem to place a lot of emphasis on this, and he had a reason for it. Do you remember? Karen, are you with me? Karen can't seem to hear me right now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was the question?
Right.
Can you ask the question again? You're fading
Dr.
out.
Kendi had a particular, Dr. Kendi had a particular attitude and philosophy about non-racist. He said in his writings that you're either a racist or anti-racist. He didn't have he didn't have any real support for a person who said I am not a racist, right? And or I'm a non-racist. He didn't have any position for that. Do you remember his comments?
Yeah. I think what stands out for me in his definition is the action part of it. You know, it's how we are and what we're doing. And we, you know, I think we have, for those of us that are raised in the United States, we're surrounded by a white supremacy culture. So, you know, it affects us in different ways, more, you know, but I think the real question is how we act, and to be aware that there will be times when we will do things that are racist, you know, that, you know, and so
well,
the point is
I would agree with you. Yeah, I would agree. It seemed to me that the point that he was making is there is, you either racist or anti-racist.
Right, yeah.
You either complicit in racism, or you're doing something about it. You know, there was it's kind of like if a racist come to you and say I'm a racist, and there is no place to be other than being complicit with him and supporting racism, or you're being an anti-racist and challenging him and trying to change policy. You know, he talked about that a great deal. You know, that you have to challenge the thinking and challenge the policy. I found that very interesting in hearing his position on that.
Yeah, I think it's a
Norman,
choice.
what are your thoughts? Yes, it is a choice, and that's the point he's making.
And it's a choice,
right?
Think? And I think it's a choice that we are always called to make. I think that's what I take from him, that it is always a choice, and that we have to, because of how we're socialized, it's one that we have to consciously make, and one in which we can find ourselves, at least in my own experience, doing things, you know, making racist choices, you know, what we are support, even though our intentions, you know, our intentions are good. We, you know, we can contribute to the system. So it's a conscious choice, trying to be conscious about what we're doing.
I agree.
You know,
go ahead, Doris.
There was this thing called subconscious bias, or unconscious bias, that enters into our actions and our behaviors, and it moves us to decisions. Sometimes we may not be actively aware of why we are making that decision.
Yes.
So I think that plays a role as well.
Yes.
I'd like, if I can follow up on that, because I hear multiple people kind of circling around this same idea, or nailing the same idea. You know, Dr. Bell talked about awareness, and self-awareness, which is absolutely key. But I want to apply that and what Doris just said to something kind of remarkable that you did about 5 minutes ago, Khalil. And I think it's something that's pretty rare. You confessed. You said, I had a conversation with a woman with a Southern accent. She's from Appalachia, so I expected certain things. And you confessed to us and 30 people online with us that you had behaved as a person who is racist. Yeah. And I think that's a really rare occurrence. And I think it's really, really important, whether we say it to everyone on a webinar or we just say to ourselves, oh my gosh, look what I just did. And I'm going to make sure I don't do it again. And if possible, I'm going to apologize, unless that's going to make things more difficult or hurtful. But I think that idea of, you know, confession is sometimes a loaded word, but self-awareness, and then, you know, calling ourselves on our stuff, and then changing. And that also speaks to the implicit or subconscious bias that Dr. McGuffey is talking about. I think it's key to this work.
I agree. Adisa, go ahead.
I wanted to follow up also on these comments, because I think, as Dr. McGuffey said, intention is really critical in this. And so is self-consciousness, or, you know, whether you have implicit bias or not. Because I could convince myself easily that, for example, if I want to claim I'm not a racist, I don't have a problem with the blacks and brown people, okay? Yeah, but I define them as a group through some other ways that I have not put language to it, by some other stereotypes. And I would then say, oh, but I'm not a racist. I'm doing this because of these other characteristics. So I think the issue of, I'm calling it oppression of other people, whether it is by color or by gender or by class or whatever. This kind of oppression is really very deep. Even for a human being to dig herself out of it, it's very deep, because you can get out of one level and then there is the other and then there is the other, and we need to help each other. But that's where unconscious, maybe conscious, implicit bias comes in, and it's really important to be aware of our intentions, or people trying to make us aware of them.
Yeah, yes. There is some ideas that he talked about in terms of education as well. He said he believes that the policies that we put forward in education has critically crippled many people in the population. The other aspect I found interesting about the book, that he talked about that racism that is generally thought of being perpetrated by whites. I'll ask the question: do you think Black and brown people are also racist? I'll ask that question as well, and then we'll start with the heavier question. Do you think? Dr. Bell, do you think Black and brown people are racist as well? And do you think that they are in? Dr. Bell can't hear me, I don't think. Dr. Bell,
I
can you
got
hear
you.
me?
I'm on it now. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Do you think Black and brown people can be racist?
Yeah, if they have power over the people that they want to impose. For example, I've seen Black men in foreign countries treating the natives like they were subhuman. Okay? However, it's because they had the power. Okay? You got racism has to be on two axes. One is, at least two. One is intent, the other is behavior. Okay? Now, if your intent is to impose your will on someone you think is less than you, and you have the power to do so, you can be racist. Otherwise, all you are is angry if you are the one receiving the action. So there are very few incidents when Blacks can be racist unless they have the power over the person next they're concerned with. So racism, in my definition, requires the racist to have the most power.
Right.
You can have some, but you have to account for the guy who does not have the power. He has to count on the conscience of the people who do. His power won't free him. It is the conscience of other humans observing the situation. That's why to go into a place where you know the people are going to beat you only serves the purpose because other people have a conscience, and that they can render their feelings on the people who are doing the beating. That's the only way the civil rights movement was successful, is because we had television. We had worldwide information. America, under normal conditions, that could have gone on and no one would have ever known about. But people in Japan were watching Blacks get beat. People in Bermuda, people in Canada. This was new. And the conscience that we are no longer what we thought we were in America, we're hypocrites, that played on the mind of the South. So the problem you gotta have, there has to be an awareness. And for the guy who's weak, he's got to in some way gather the consciousness and the, I would say the, for lack of a better word, the conscious working of others who are not involved in that type of thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yes, blacks can they can be cruel for those who are not like them if they have the power. And that is the thing. In my definition of racism, you cannot be racist unless you have the power over the object of which you want to rule. Okay.
I could say that Dr. Fenty's, I would recommend that everyone read his book, and that's what I'll try to generalize it there. He generally talks about African Americans have adopted or have moved themselves into positions of power that have helped and assist to put forward racist policies. Now, the interesting thing that he brings forward was this discrimination that happens inside the group itself. It's in the African American group. And I think this is also in many groups and probably all groups, you know, whether they're, you know, Palestinians or Arabs or Indonesians. We find a lot of discriminations within groups. And he says that this notion that I'm better than you does not just play its card out in one race against another race. He said this attitude, the psychology happens within races as well. So when he says, and he points to his time at university, where the sororities would not bring you into their sorority unless you were a particular shade of brown, which was discriminating. And they not only thought of this in physical terms, they also thought about it in intellectual terms. That this dark person cannot be as bright, as smart.
May I speak to that?
Yes,
may I speak to that?
Go right ahead.
They always had what we call coloration problems. Blacks have learned to in some way put a value on lighter skin that's higher than that on darker skin within the group. They used to have what we call a brown paper test, brown paper bag test. And if you could pass the brown paper bag test, you could go into any sorority, fraternity, and everything. But if you didn't make it, you were one of the ones left behind. And the problem is, this hurt Black people themselves. And it killed a lot of good Black people who were darker complexion, who had more talent, more skill and everything else, because of this happening inside the world, inside the race. But this starts, Khalil, at the cradle. This starts in the home. This starts on the block. You don't have to go away. A mother look at one child, said, this child is lighter complexion. The guy said, oh, this is my pretty one. One is dark, so she stayed in the oven too long. The problem is we have been infested with this white superiority syndrome, that lighter skin means more humanness and quality in that person. Plain lie. But this is something you have to unlearn. And you can't unlearn it one night. It has to start, I put it this way, it has to start everywhere, and you can't get it to start everywhere. There's no one place you can put your hand in the system. You just start where you can and try to get the changes made. Okay? That's where that is. But this is a big problem within Black people.
Yes.
I'd like to say something to Dr.
Aziza, go ahead.
Thank you for making me feel better about the fact that I'm still angry after a long life about the colonizers of my country.
You're quite welcome.
Actually, their harm has not evaporated. It just takes new forms.
True.
But
True.
one of their policies in the whole Asian African continents was divide and conquer. And what you're talking about is really the divide and conquer. When I look at my people, I look at other people, they're divided into smithereens, and every little group thinks they're better than the other group, and they're all worse than each other in terms of the oppression they're living under. And yes, it all starts at home, and we need to educate our people how to be in solidarity with one another.
I would like to comment on this as well. So we are influenced to a great degree by external factors like the media. When we see images and marketing where there are only certain kinds of images that are presented, where these are the best, the brightest, the prettiest, the most intellectual, then that begins to say, if you don't look like that, then you're undervalued.
Yeah.
When you get to books that are marketed and you see all of these wonderful things that are in the books, and you are of a different culture than what's always in the book, then you begin to wonder, well, why am I not in the book? There is an innate thought form that says less than.
Yes, I remember standing, I think I've told this story before, but I remember standing in front of a science class. It was one having to deal with astronomy. And I was standing in front of the line. I didn't plan this, it's just an act of nature. There was someone from South America in line with me, also a Chinese person. And we were going in to study astronomy. And because we had read the textbook, each one of us recognized that there was no scientist of our culture in the book. So we had to study about this wonderful science, and one of the oldest scientists in the world, you know, studying the stars in the universe, and somehow the only people getting the book are European Americans. So you could walk away with a severe deficit there. Aziza, just one thing I want to ask you about the position of justice in the Quran. We talk about all this diversity, but justice have a very high expression in the Quran in helping us deal with this with the diversity that we have.
It's the core principle in the Quran, adala, because God set the laws of this universe and he set them in due balance. And due balance is justice, whether it is in nature, due balance, so what we're doing to the world, you know, in terms of pollution, etc., that's upsetting the balance, or in human relationships, and that's the scales of justice. But the justice we talk about is not the punitive justice, it is restorative justice, where the society is going all together to be moved forward. And God says, you know, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but the one who forgives does better. So and how do you expect me to forgive you in the afterlife if you cannot forgive each other in this life? But forgiveness for me is that at least the person who is doing the damage has repented. I cannot forgive somebody who keeps doing bad things to me. And that's the struggle I was having with the colonizer. Can I forgive? But I don't see that they have repented yet. They only took different forms of oppressing. So I guess I'll have to wait. Maybe my grandchildren will.
I think I'm waiting with you. We have 15 minutes left. I wanted to spend this time, and I know I've done really poorly and an injustice to those who have asked questions online on our chat section here, and I'm not going to be able to get to them because I think a lot of the questions have been asked throughout the program and throughout our discussion. But I want to ask each one of you in parting, what can an individual do, just in a short sentence or so, to rid their thinking of racism, or what can they do to rid the society or their community of racism? Karen, I'll start with you.
I give that some thought and pass for the moment. Go ahead.
Okay, all right.
I'm working on it.
I know how I can be. I'm like that, Dr. McGuffey.
Would you just state your question again? Because I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Sure. What can we do as citizens, as individuals, to combat race and racism? How can we become a true anti-racist?
Well, you know, Congressman John Lewis says, if you see something, say something. I would think that that would be one way to speak up and say, if you feel that an interaction that you have experienced, someone has said something or a behavior that has been presented to you, if that feels racist to you, if that feels inequity to you, if that makes you feel, then you should say that to the person. You don't necessarily have to get your baseball bat, but you can say in a way that, you know, what you said or what you did made me feel. And that would address that issue. It brings to the awareness that for you, that's inappropriate.
Yes. Dr. Bell?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Bell.
Nothing beats bringing blacks and whites together and talking about it. That's the first step. You talk about the problems, your feelings, you let everyone know where I come from and what my problem might be, and they let you know, and you come to a consensus that, hey, we might be able to help each other here. But the first step, we have to be open enough to talk about it, open there to one another, black to whites. Not just whites on whites or blacks on blacks, but they must come together to talk about the problem. A lot of things can happen from there, but this is the first step. This is the first step in recognizing what you're doing here in this racism is hurting me. You didn't know it, but now you know it. What are you going to do about it? And the thing may come, well, this is what I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me years ago? But you got to talk about it, and that's where you start. And there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee it's going to be successful, but unless you face it, you're not going to solve it. One-on-one, eye to eye.
Yes, sir.
That's my
I agree. Yes, sir. And you come with the background to know that you've just been here a long time. You know these experiences. You know what works. That's what
I remember at one time at our door, white fellow said, I have no problems with black people as long as they know their place. I mean, he was honest. And I cleared my throat and said, well, just what is their place? And he thought about it. He said, I'll be damned. He recognized where it was. You got to talk. You got to talk. All right. So
that's what I mean by when you see something, say something. You know, that's a one-on-one basis, because that's the beginning, and then that moves you to the collective experience. You know,
this was in a group. We were exploring feelings.
We're gonna hear from Karen now. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I think to be aware, to work on our awareness in terms of study and talking to people, as Dr. Bell said, and also to admit when we've been wrong and to be able to move on. I think a lot of the problems have come from when we don't admit we have said or done something that has caused harm to somebody else. And so we're busy defending, ourselves about not being anti-racist or whatever. We're not in conversation with them about what, to learn what it was that we did to raise our awareness, to believe that person, as opposed to trying to say, well, you shouldn't have been so sensitive about X, Y, Z. And then to make amends if that's called for, and then to resolve, to do something differently moving forward, and to recognize we're human. So we are going to fail. It's not a once and done, once and done kind of thing. So,
Yes.
so I think that that calls for some changing of our hearts, and a shifting of our minds to be in that place of humility.
Indeed. And Aziza, do you want to a closing comment?
Yeah, I really like what Dr. Bell said, but I wish it was that simple. Especially, I'm thinking of one example, and not just on the issue of race, but gender, etc. Veracity. Somehow the person in power, whatever they say, the truth is on their side. And if you say something else, your veracity is so quickly questioned by the group. And what do? Even if you're talking in a scientific conference about scientific facts, for example, when the man says it, it is accepted a lot faster than if I say it.
Yeah.
May I, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Bell, I got to give Norman his closing statement. I'm sorry, Dr. Zizu, were you finished?
No, that's what I wanted to say. It's really, I remember a situation here in the US where one person was describing to another how she saw her own grandfather fall to the ground full of bullets from a certain incident. And the reaction was, last time I met with you, you said the same story, and it was exactly to the word as you said it this time. What is the truth about this? It's like she had rehearsed it. I thought it was so callous. It's such an example to be telling that person, you're making this up, when she was torn about what happened to her family. What can you say in such a group?
Yes. So people just don't believe your worth. Norman?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I think all of these together are powerful. The thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'm actually working up some notes for a sermon coming up, is the spiritual practice of discomfort. It's actually entering into being in an uncomfortable place, and all of us are going to have to be uncomfortable in doing this work. There are going to be times when we have to be honest with ourselves, and that's going to make us uncomfortable. As Dr. McGuffey said, we're going to have to be honest with each other, and that's going to make us uncomfortable. And it's absolutely critical to the work. So I'll leave it there.
Yes. Comfort and discomfort is exactly where we are. And this notion of racism is a real challenge. Just piggybacking off you a little bit, Norman, I've just finished a documentary on the principles of respect from the Islamic tradition. And in there, we have just a number of scholars. There's a principle in the Islam that has to do with the ummah, this community of humanity that requires respect and the sanctity of life. All these things were part of what it means to practice Islam as a way of life. But I can tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your scholarship. We have recorded the evening. We'll put this anywhere we can find a space for it. And I must tell you that your views have warmed my heart and changed my thinking on a number of issues. This book, I think, should be read by anybody who's living today. I found it to be extremely stimulating. And I'll leave Tamika. Tamika, is there anyone that you think we haven't answered questions, or that we might entertain one question in 5 minutes? Somebody mentioned that the brown bag test. I saw that, and I think we talked about that a little bit.
Right. There was a question about.
Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, so there's one question about explaining why it's important not to ask who is and who is not racist, right? It gets away from the forensic method of classical crime fighters who determine who suspects are and then find evidence of criminality before assigning guilt and punishment. So it's asking the question about why it's important not to ask who is and who is not a racist, according to Dr. Kendi's work.
Sure. I'm almost absolutely certain that the notion of race, a racist, is very clear. I really don't want to give people a whole lot of room for escape here. I think that you truly, I think it's definable and knowable if a person is a racist or not. And I don't think I have to wait for the hereafter to find that out. But Fenty's book is excellent. I would encourage everybody to read it. Thanks, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Khalil.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Khalil. Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great being with you all.
Yes, it's
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Good night. Have a good evening.